Five Nights at Freddy's 2 is probably one of the most iconic of all the Five Nights at Freddy's games, and is often considered to be one of the best games in the series. And nearly 2 years ago, I made a video titled Why FNAF 2 is easily the worst, and that video got some attention. And in fact, my video is one of the most popular in terms of negative reviews on this game. And it's one of those videos I still get asked about, whether or not I still agree with this video or not anymore. And with the FNAF 2 movie having just come out, I thought this would be the perfect time to revisit this video and give a modern review of this game, going over my thoughts and whether I still think this is the worst game in the series. So without further ado, let's get into the video. So firstly, the big question. Do I still think that FNAF 2 is the worst FNAF game? No, not by a long shot. I think that Five Nights at Freddy's 2 is a much better game than I gave it credit for all the way back in my original video. I think that I was overly harsh and my opinions on the game have changed quite a bit. Don't get me wrong, I sort of think FNAF 2 is exactly a highlight in the series, but I would say that Secret of the Mimic, Ruin, and Sister Location are way worse games. In fact, I would say that Pizza Sim is worse, but that's just my opinion. When I look at the FNAF series, I view the first 4 games as being entirely focused on the horror and atmosphere, with a repetitive yet engaging gameplay loop which tests the player's skills throughout each night, with Night 5 and beyond being a final challenge to test your skills, and in terms of achieving that, I think that FNAF 2 did a pretty good job. However, out of the original 4 games that have this loop, Sister Location and Pizza Sim don't count, I would say that Five Nights at Freddy's 2 does this the least effective, and we will go over that, but I think in order to do that, we first have to analyze what makes the other 3 games work better. So here we go. FNAF 1 was the one that started it all, so of course it works extremely well, as it was the first game of its kind. There wasn't really anything to base it off at the time, and so Scott had the free will to make this game exactly the way he wanted it to be, and it paid off extremely well. The fear and atmosphere of this game is something that has been talked to complete death by many creators, including myself. The introduction of Bonnie and Chica on Night 1, Foxy on Night 2, before getting introduced to Freddy himself on Night 3, before Night 4 has your guide literally be killed, before Night 5 you are dealing with the most aggressive version of the characters. Unless you do all the extra challenges, of course. All the while you deal with the ever-decreasing power. There only being 4 characters also really helps define the threats, and as much as there are ideal strategies and only one camera you really need to look at now, at the time, this game really allowed you to play it in any way you wanted to. Do you keep track of where every single animatronic is at the risk of losing more power? Or do you keep your camera on Pirate's Cove or Freddy's stage and hope that Bunny and Chica don't sneak up on you? It's super effective and is only really ruined now by age and the fact that this game has been dissected to absolute death in the present times. But I still think for what Scott was trying to make, it was a complete success, and the game playing out the way it did made complete sense. FNAF 3 is a bit of an anomaly with the original 4, as it only has 1 active threat. However, it also forces you to use literally every single resource at your disposal in order to fend off the Dead by Daylight killer himself. Every single camera, every vent snare, every resource, audio lure, etc. has to be used and can be forced to be used at any time, with enough unpredictability to make it tense and scary. However, I will say that the horror in this game is definitely the least effective overall. The scariest part of this game is just not knowing where Springtrap is, but otherwise it's honestly not that bad. The phantoms get you pretty accustomed to jump scares, and although they serve their purpose in adding to the game's difficulty and challenge, they do also limit the game's ability to be as scary as possible. Not to mention the jump scares absolutely suck. However, for what Scott was trying to achieve, FNAF 3 pulls it off insanely well, but there are some flaws. A lot that are actually shared of FNAF 2, which we will talk about later. Five Nights at Freddy's 4 is probably the game that does this formula the most effective, with it taking the best parts of all the games and turning it into arguably the scariest of the originals, and arguably the scariest of all FNAF games. I say arguably because there's no denying that Help Wanted is probably the most scariest, since physically being in the room is always more terrifying than watching on a screen. But FNAF 4 introduces all of its threats at a reasonable time, getting you used to the gameplay loop, and like FNAF 3, utilizing literally every single resource imaginable to combat all the threats, learning how to deal with Foxy, Freddy, and when to close the door on Bonnie and Chica. And surprisingly, it switches it up on Night 5 with the addition of a completely new enemy who plays different. And although this seems like it completely messes with the original gameplay loop, in my opinion at the very least, it is actually the most effective, as Night 5 just goes from being the same gameplay loop but harder to a completely new and challenging experience, testing if you've truly adapted to the mechanics, and I think this works the most in FNAF 4 since there is literally no phone calls whatsoever. So there's no information, no added instruction, you are literally going in blind, which I think adds to the horror and the challenge of the game in a very effective way. So You can now see that all three of these games are able to effectively add to the challenge and test the player in a fair, engaging, and terrifying way. Obviously, all three of these games have their problem. FNAF 1 has a really easy exploitable strategy, FNAF 3 is really scary, and FNAF 4 isn't very viewer accessible. But in my opinion, all three of these problems don't ruin the experience for me, and they still make for them very good games. Now, how does FNAF 2 compare? Well, FNAF 2 was almost the complete opposite of the first game, having a whopping 11 characters to FNAF 1's 4, having no doors compared to FNAF 1, and unlike FNAF 1, almost all the characters are dealt with in a similar manner. Well, kind of. I'll get into that later. FNAF 2, in my opinion, is the least effective in building a horror experience to test the player's skill, since the gameplay loop on night 1 is honestly exactly the same as night 5's, which is mask, light, music, repeat. Okay, there is a little bit of variety, but you know what? This game isn't as awful as said before. There are problems, and I have an entirely dedicated section to talking about that, but I think I'm going to start off my review of FNAF 2 by talking about Five Nights at Freddy's 2 is, in my opinion, the most iconic out of all the games, and in my opinion, probably has as good of an atmosphere as the original game does. This location is probably my favourite, and although of course it's not perfect by any means of the word, FNAF 2 probably has my favourite building, since it has so much atmosphere, and honestly it just fits the pizzeria aspect way more than the original game does, as the original game more so seems like it's a rundown pizza place that is nowhere near the level of success that it used to be, while this game's location seems like a very popular attraction with way more party rooms and way more stuff going on behind the scenes. And although this building does fall into one of the game's flaws, I'll save that for later. Now, the characters in this game are absolutely incredible, and in my humble opinion, some of the best character designs in the entire series. FNAF 1 is probably the only game that rivals that in terms of character designs, but I can do 50-50 each day. All FNAF 2's characters are really spectacular and extremely well designed, and honestly, let's rate every single character and how well designed they are right now. Starting off with the toys, these guys are definitely the weaker of the two main characters that this game has, do not get me wrong. However, I do think that their designs are still really good, all things considered. Toy Freddy shows a much more approachable, more friendly version of the character that we have known to love, and although everyone makes fun of how fat he is, I think this really contributes to his overall design and really emphasizes how this is the location that's made for children. Toy Bonnie is arguably the strongest of the toy animatronics, as he does everything that Toy Freddy does, but better. And Toy Chica, well, she's probably the worst, although I know some people that would disagree. Anyways, other than the main three toys, we have Mangle and Balloon Boy. And while Balloon Boy is a decent design, I do understand why people hate him. And Mangle is absolutely killer, and a really good design for a character, and probably one of the scariest characters in the entire game, maybe even in the entire FNAF franchise. I mean, even their sound design is really creepy. The static that follows them around creates this uneasy feeling throughout your playthrough, whenever you're looking at one of their cameras, and especially when they're in the office. However, I think the scariest animatronic of all is the puppet. Okay, maybe not the scariest. I mean, he can dance for you. But the presence of this character is off the charts. This creepy slender figure that is only a few ticks away from killing you is a fire idea, and the actual design of the puppet itself is fantastic and one of the best in the entire series without a doubt. She's one of the most iconic characters in the series for a reason, and honestly could be the face of FNAF 2 and also rivals Springtrap in levels of popularity. However, when we are talking about FNAF 2's character designs, I think it's safe to say that the Wizards are the ones that steal the show. All of the Wizards have absolutely incredible designs, with Withered Bonnie probably being the single most popular character from this game, and maybe of all time. Although Withered Bonnie is not my personal favourite, that goes to Withered Freddy, I think that Withered Bonnie is absolutely amazing and a very well designed character. The others all have really good designs too, with Withered Freddy being absolutely terrifying, Withered Chica being brought up from hell, and Withered Foxy probably having the most iconic jump scare in this entire game. On the topic of that, some of the jump scares are really good. Not all of them, I'll get to that in a bit, but Withered Foxy, Mangle, and the puppet are really good and all have A-tier jump scares in my opinion, but more on the jump scares later. But now that I think we've established how well this game looks, let's talk about the lore, which I think is the #1 thing this game got right. FNAF 2 was the one that introduced everyone to the secret minigames, and the minigames in this game are some of the best and most creepy in the entire franchise. Give Cake is an absolutely terrifying minigame that shows us the death of Charlie Emily. Give Gifts, Give Life is an absolutely unsettling minigame revolving around the puppet supposedly stuffing the children into the suits. Foxy Go 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 shows off the absolutely horrifying scene of the children being murdered by Purple Guy, which is who we knew him as at the time, and I'll get to him in a bit. And of course, Save Them, which was the only minigame with 2 endings, where you either wander around aimlessly for ages, or you were stopped by the Purple Guy, and the sound designs of these minigames with the deep robotic voice spelling out the different phrases for each minigame really add to the whole experience, and this game added a lot to the lore. And of course, we cannot forget the Easter eggs, which I will say, this game easily has the best and most iconic Easter eggs in the entire series. I mean, the paper bowls are so iconic. Nah, who am I kidding? Even though they are basically not even relevant or even remembered anymore, Shadow Bonnie and Shadow Freddy are by far the coolest Easter egg characters that we have ever seen. And yes, honestly, I think they're even cooler than Golden Freddy, who I didn't mention in the design section, but he is here and he's really cool and one of the best designed characters in the entire series, especially the FNAF 2 version. But moving on, I think the roster of characters, the lore, the Easter eggs, and all that do make this game super iconic. However, I do want to talk about the sound design for a moment because I think this game has some of the most underrated atmospheric soundtracks in the entire series. Everyone talks about FNAF 1 or FNAF 4 and how these games have really good atmosphere to them, but this game I think has really good atmosphere as well. The subtle hum in the office, the buzzing of the cameras, which is a more high-tech version of the first, making it feel more like interference rather than malfunctioning, which really fits the new location. Putting the mask on or shining the flashlight, the sound of the animatronics moving around, the vent sounds, and even though it's an absolute meme at this point, the hallway alarm sound. Although it does have its problems, which I'll get to in a bit, I think that the idea behind this alarm is really strong, with it being the first indication of danger in the entire series, while not always meaning immediate danger. It's a very different feel to the original, where, quite frankly, the fear was the characters could show up at any time, and this game subverts that by basically shouting at you whenever you're in danger. However, by the later nights, this alarm sound is basically playing all the time, which really emphasizes how helpless you are and that you are basically fighting for your lives. I already talked about Mango Static and how effective it can actually be and how unsettling it is. However, the blackout sounds when the animatronics are actually in your office and staring you down, and you get this buzzing which messes with your senses, it's really creepy. And I think it works as a nice little bit of fear without relying on a big jump scare. The last sound is the music box, which I think is so iconic, and it does work extremely well, even though it's a tad meme. Now, with all this praise, you might think this game is really good, and that my previous video was a complete waste. Well, I hate to burst your bubble, but
oh, brother, this guy stinks!
yeah, so this game definitely still has some massive problems. And a lot of my original points from that original video still stand. I may have been way too harsh going on to factors like Mangle being able to crawl on the wall being unrealistic and the animatronics are too heavy to fit in the vent, but cut me some slack. I was a baby back then. Anyways, what problems do I think this game actually has? Well, a lot, and more specifically, the main gameplay loop. I think it's safe to say that every OG FNAF game suffers from a boring and repetitive gameplay loop that makes replays and even playthroughs a tad stale. However, Five Nights at Freddy's 2 takes that idea and dials it up to 11 with the most boring and repetitive gameplay loop ever. This game was meant to be this over-the-top chaotic experience where double the animatronics and more from the first game are all coming to you, and unlike the original game, you have very little to defend yourself with, requiring the player to keep up with all the threats at once and try not to get overwhelmed and to keep their cool, and this fails on so many levels. Oh my god. For starters, out of the 11 characters that this game has, none of them are dealt with in the exact same way, which is they arrive at the office, put on the mask for 5 seconds, and wait. Now, there are 2 other characters in Withered Foxy and the Puppet, which require you to manage them in different ways. However, this is accomplished in the most mind-numbing yet hyper-intensive way possible, basically requiring you to have their attention 24/7 or you're dead. This makes the loop quite simple. Flash hallway, white music box, mask, repeat. Now you may be saying, Jerakai, how is this any different to FNAF 1, FNAF 3, or FNAF 4? And to that, I say to everyone who has just commented that without actually watching the rest of this video, subscribe to the video to see this, a lot is different to justify it. But let's discuss that. Starting with FNAF 1, which everyone comments on having the same problem of the same gameplay loop over and over again. And yes, this game has that problem, but there's a couple of different reasons as to why this works. For starters, every single animatronic is dealt with in a different way. So even though there are less animatronics, there's actually more to do. And although dealing with animatronics is all done in the same but similar way with the mask, because there's only literally one thing that can actually can defend yourself with, which is the doors, there's one thing that completely changes this and makes FNAF 1 be able to get away with it, and that is the power. FNAF 1 has the doors, which blocks out all the animatronics, making it impossible for them to get in. However, doing this leaves you at risk, or more likely to the fate of having the animatronics just wait for your power to drain and then murdering you. FNAF 2's mask and flashlight can be spammed for the entire night with basically zero consequences. I mean, sure, you can run out of flashlight battery, but be honest, when has that ever actually happened in FNAF 2? The second reason FNAF 1's gameplay works and FNAF 2's doesn't is the freedom of gameplay. FNAF 1 has an optimal strategy, but that optimal strategy is not 100% effective, meaning that even the best players in the world can get caught off guard. And it's not forcing you to play this way. There are many ways you can choose to play this game. You can manage all the threats by watching everyone on the camera, you can just watch Freddy or Foxy, you can do stupid challenges that make you want to die. There's so much freedom. FNAF 3 is also the game with the most freedom, as the optimal strategy in this game, again, isn't very consistent, and you have to adapt on the fly since Springtrap can just decide to beeline to your office, and the constant threats and appliances to manage make that game a lot more engaging and a lot more fun. Five Nights at Freddy's 2 forces you into the gameplay loop of flash, hallway, wine, music box, mask, repeat from night 3, as if you don't, you die. This game doesn't have the freedom that FNAF 1 or 3 has. Like, looking at other cameras, I dare you to click off cam 11, which is a real shame because there are some really cool renders on some of the cameras that are heavily underutilized. But I know what you must be thinking. FNAF 4 forces you into the same loop no matter what. What's the difference? Well, FNAF 4 doesn't have as much as FNAF 2 has. There's only 4 characters and only 4 places you can go. And each character has to be dealt with in a specific way. Plus, the atmosphere and the gameplay loop are way more fun, and the game in a way is way more fast-paced and responsive. FNAF 2 in comparison has 9 characters forcing you into a 5-second animation where you quite literally can't do anything. You also have way more actions and things to worry about in FNAF 4 than you do in FNAF 2. And by comparison, FNAF 2 becomes very stale and boring. Now, a common complaint about FNAF 2 I see all the time is that the game is way too hard, and I even made that complaint in my original video. However, I want to retract this. This game is only hard if you're doing nights 7 to 10, 20, and maybe night 6 compared to nights 1 to 5. This game is just a rhythm and reaction test, and it's really not that difficult, all things considered. So everyone who said that the reason I thought this game sucked was because of a skill issue, I can beat this game very easily. It's really not that hard. Though the custom night is definitely tricky. And look, it sucks, it's boring, and it's way harder, but at the same time, it's meant to be. So whatever, I really don't care. The only possible way you can play this game differently is if you use like a -7 strategy, or just decide to try and store the animatronic with the flashlight. But in my opinion, that's more boring than the actual gameplay loop. So I guess you just can't win with this game. If there were more things to do and more variety, like saying putting the mask on for certain characters actually gets you killed, then I could see this game having some potential with its gameplay loop. But right now, it's really not there. Now, let's talk about the issues that I have with the sound designs, because I did say that I had some issues with that, which has to do with the actual frequency of some of the sounds. The main one being the puppet's music box, which is extremely frustrating to listen to during a playthrough, mainly because it is the only camera that you can actually be on, which also leads me to my next point. There are so many awesome camera renders that really add to the horror and create a lot of opportunities for fun gameplay loops, but instead, Scott decided that you are locked onto cam 11, which is probably the single most uninteresting camera in the entire game, since besides just literally being a box, the only character who can actually appear on that camera, besides the puppet, is Mangle, and even then, it doesn't do anything. The speed of this music box is honestly absurd, and it really sucks because this game had a lot of cool moments with the cameras. The way that the animatronics look on them and all that is really awesome, but we don't get to see any of that because we were listening to this stupid music box for the entire night. Back onto the sound design, the stupid hallway alarm can get extremely annoying. While I do like the idea behind this sound, I feel like a more subtle version would have gone a long way into making me playing this game a tad more interesting and not so painful. Now, the last thing I want to mention is the jump scares. They honestly are all bad, besides the ones I mentioned before, which is sad to see because the character designs are so good, especially the Wizards, and especially Golden Freddy. It's literally just a PNG of a head. Like, what were you thinking? Now, to be honest, there isn't much more to talk about. This game is honestly just painfully mid in terms of gameplay and has a lot of missed potential. I mean, there is one more thing I want to talk about, but honestly, it's not that important. Okay, yeah, I gotta talk about this. The game has a lot of clipping in the character models, and to show that, here's a montage of literally every single instance of clipping I could find in FNAF 2. Enjoy. Withered Freddy's microphone is clipping through his hand when he's in the office. Withered Freddy's left shoulder is clipping through his arm when he's in the office. Withered Freddy's inner wires clip through his body when he's in the main hallway in front of you. Withered Freddy's leg clips through his pelvis in the hall in front of you. Withered Freddy's wires clip through his arm in the first teaser of the game. Withered Bonnie's legs clip through his torso in the parts and service room. Withered Bonnie's ears clip through the top of his head slightly when in Party Room 1. Withered Bonnie's ear clips through the top of his head slightly in the left vent. Withered Bonnie's lower body is clipping through the back of the vent. Withered Bonnie's bow tie clips through his lower jaw in parts and service. Withered Bonnie's bow tie clips through his lower jaw in the custom night menu. Withered Bonnie's bow tie clips through his lower jaw whenever he's in the main hallway in front of you, of which there are 2 variations. Withered Bonnie's bow tie clips through his lower jaw when in the doorway in parts and service. Withered Chica's head feathers clip through the top of the right vent. Withered Chica's left shoulder clips through her torso in the right vent. I assume her wires are clipping into the vent, and whatever is happening with the body in the back of the vent. Withered Chica in parts and service is a mess. Her body is completely see-through and her arms are just floating. Also, her neck is in the wrong spot, clipping through the back of her head. Withered Foxy has a habit of jump scaring you through the wall. Also, Withered Foxy's teeth clip through his snout during his jump scare. Withered Foxy's rare screen also has his teeth clipping through his snout. Golden Freddy's arms and legs clip through his body in the office. Toy Freddy's jaw clips through the inside of his mouth when he's in the office. Toy Freddy's legs clip through his waist and pelvis when he's about to enter the office. Also, his feet and knees are weird, but I can't really tell because of the lighting. Toy Bonnie's fingers are clipping through his guitar when he's on the show stage. Toy Bonnie's legs clip through his body during his jump scare animation. Toy Bonnie's arms clip through his face during his jump scare animation. Toy Bonnie's guitar clips through Toy Freddy's body in every single Celebrate poster and newspaper clipping, of which there are 4 present in the game. Toy Bonnie's neck clips through his head whenever he's in the office. Toy Bonnie's finger slightly clips through the lower right vent, but it's barely noticeable. Toy Bonnie's leg clips through his torso in the Party Room 2 cam. Toy Bonnie's thumb clips through his guitar in Party Room 3. Toy Chica's legs and body clip through her hips and pelvis in the Party Room 4 cam. Her head also clips through her shoulder in this camera. Toy Chica's legs clip again in the Party Room 1 camera. Toy Chica's knee, feet, and arms are clipping through the vent when she's in there. Toy Chica's leg clips through her body when during her jump scare animation. Toy Chica's arm might be clipping through Toy Freddy on the main stage, but it's hard to tell. It also might be clipping through Toy Freddy in the newspaper. Mangle's ear clips through her second endoskeleton head in the game area cam. Mangle's ear clips through her second endoskeleton head in the Party Room 2 cam. Mangle's ear clips through the right vent. Mangle's endo head clearly clips through the right vent. Mangle's wires clip through her bow tie whenever she's in the hall in front of you. And that was all the characters that had multiple examples of clipping. There was a few other examples of clipping with the other characters, but only like 1 or 2. For Balloon Boy, I think his body is clipping through the bottom of the left vent, and maybe his right hand is clipping through his body, but I really can't tell. For Shadow Freddy, his legs do clip through his torso, but you can't really tell. The secret endoskeleton, his ear clips through his arm in the vent, and the arm is also clipping slightly into the vent. Now, there are also a multitude of glitches, such as Foxy jumping out at you on the camera and all that, but the worst aspect of this game, in my opinion, is Mangle. Not only does Mangle clip in literally every single instance that they are in, but they are also not even in our plane of existence, quite literally being a fucking PNG that isn't even affected by the flashlight. There are so many instances where animatronics PNGs just don't look real, and to be honest, one of my biggest problems with this game is the fact that it is extremely easy to be taken out of the experience due to these super obvious flaws in the game's design. And it's really unfortunate, since a lot of these problems could have been solved by just a little bit more time in the oven. But it was clear this game was rushed, which leads me to my conclusion on the matter. Yeah, so that's the cue to go into the last section of the video. Like, come on, can we get there already? Now, looking back on this game, do I think this is the worst game in the series? No, I don't. However, I do think this game is the most wasted of all the FNAF games, arguably having the most potential out of any of the original games. Maybe not as much potential as Security Breach, but whatever. FNAF 2 is a tale of why sometimes you don't rush things. Obviously, I understand why FNAF 2 came out the way it did. And honestly, I don't even blame Scott, since if I had a game blow up to the extent of FNAF 2, I would want to rush out a sequel and subsequent sequels as fast as humanly possible. So I do understand that part. However, that doesn't help this game, and overall, I think it was a huge missed opportunity to actually make a game that can hold its own among the classics. But even still, my opinion doesn't really matter, because FNAF 2 is a classic and helped shape this franchise into what it is today. So I can't really fault it too bad. But this game does deserve to be pushed from the F tier of worst FNAF game all the way to D tier. Yeah, this game still isn't very good. Hey guys, just cutting in here, forgot to record an outro. Just want to thank all my channel members and also tell you to click on this video right here. Also shout out to It's Dingo for editing this video for me. Anyways, have a good rest of your day guys. Bye bye.